Hello, good afternoon to our audience in the UK. Good morning to people in Indonesia, I believe. And
No, this is evening.
evening. So evening to people in Indonesia, and must be good morning to people in America. I've been talking to a lot of people in America recently, so maybe that's what it is. So welcome to today's In Conversation. Before I go any further, I'd just like to introduce our guest today. Mr. Dicky Sofjan, Professor Dicky Sofjan, is someone who has done a lot of things over the years. He's a professor at University Gadjah Mada in Indonesia. He's also an Indonesian scholar, an interreligious thinker, a social entrepreneur. He's been involved in many different initiatives over the years, on both within Indonesia and also internationally, which includes attending various conferences around the world. So, you know, he has a number of different interests, from interfaith coexistence to, you know, concerns about polarization, spirituality, deeper moral and civilizational questions. So I want to touch on some of these topics today and get Professor Dicky's inspiration and thoughts on these things. So please, Professor Dicky.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi, Paul. It's really my honor and pleasure to join you in your podcast. So I'm Dicky Sofjan, and I'm based in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. And I've been teaching interreligious studies and doing research and being actively involved in a number of initiatives, both in Indonesia, in the region of Southeast Asia, as well as in different places and countries of the world. So I'm really flattered to be here and happy to share my interests and also insights on some of the work that I've been working on.
Well, it's a real it's a real pleasure, Professor Dicky. So what first shaped the way that you see the world?
Well, you know, many things shape an individual and how we see the world. I mean, for me, obviously my parents, my siblings, my family, my extended family, relatives, but also my peers, my teachers, friends at school, at university, my university professors. I mean, I think it's all of the above. And I truly feel like as we grow up, we sort of like learn a bit more about life, learn a bit more about ourselves, and then we try to develop our own sort of thinking and vision about what a good life is, what a better world that we can create. And I think, you know, life is all about lessons, right? And I remember the prophetic tradition saying that, you know, life or learning is really from the cradle to the grave. And so I take that seriously. I find that every day I'm always learning something new in life.
Excellent. I mean, that's my dad taught me the same thing as well. It's never stop learning. And he said, it's not, he said, do well at school, Paul. He said, but it's not what you learn at school, it's what you learn after.
Right.
And, you know, we're here to learn. That's what my dad believed.
I
But was
believe
there a particular moment in your life where, you know, these ideas, whether they were religious or ethics or, you know, social ideas, stopped being abstract and became something that was much more deeply personal?
Well, you know, I grew up in a diplomatic family. So my father was a diplomat and we moved around quite often. And we moved also to places like Sydney, Australia, London, and then Iran. And then, of course, I ventured out to study in various places in the US, in Singapore, Brunei, and other places. And so you pick up on things as you move and transition into different cultures and societies. And so, again, as you develop your sort of insights about society, about the world. But each time you go to a new place, each time you go and experience a new society and you visit a new country, a new region, and suddenly, wow, you know nothing about this world, and then you begin to realize that all of the things that you've learned is still minute, compared to the sort of learnings and the knowledge and the experiences that one can gain through travels and through stints and staycations and doing research in other places and countries. And that has been one of the hallmarks of my life, really, traveling and then stopping by and doing research and learning about other cultures, societies, and that to me, I feel is a privilege, yeah. And I'm thankful and grateful for the life that I have experienced. And I truly have learned a lot from other cultures and societies that I've lived in.
I was actually going to ask what kind of Indonesia did you grow up in, but actually you've lived in many places when you were growing up, and traveled extensively across cultures and regions and religions and things. So, I mean, obviously, when you see this much of humanity, it must have quite an impact that, someone who has only grown up in one particular place would not necessarily have seen some of the things that you have, or indeed that I have as someone who's also had good fortune to travel.
Absolutely. I mean, I was born in Jakarta, so I'm a child of the New Order regime under the autocratic leader of Suharto. But my first schooling was actually in Sydney, Australia. And so, the first language that I picked up in school was actually English. And so when I returned to Jakarta and sort of tried to adapt to the life there, I really had to relearn my Bahasa Indonesia. So we went to this special school where, virtually everyone were sons and daughters of diplomats. So people were speaking in Arabic, in Italian, in Japanese, in Hindi. And so, it took us quite a while, like maybe 6 months, 8 months to really adapt and be able to speak fluently in Bahasa Indonesia and to sort of regain the knowledge of the culture and the sort of intuitions that you get when living in a specific society, right?
Yeah, I had no idea we shared the same first language. That's news to me. It just goes to show, when you actually get to know and talk to people and listen, some of the things that you learn are not what you expect. Now, Indonesia is one of the most important yet least understood societies, perhaps, in the world. And indeed, when it comes to languages as well, I mean, it's not just got one language. Bahasa Indonesia was sort of like created as a language to sort of unify Indonesia. But I mean, there's so many cultures and languages just within Indonesia itself. It really is a remarkable treasure trove of culture. How would you introduce Indonesia to an international audience?
Well, Indonesia is considered as one of the most diverse countries in the world. And having said that, we probably have around 450 at least languages and perhaps 700 dialects. And so you can just imagine the mix and the diversity of people and speaking different languages. I mean, if one were to live in Jakarta and then he or she would travel 2 hours away from Jakarta, you would enter West Java. And most people there speak Sundanese, for instance, right? And so if you don't know Sundanese, then you won't understand, the local language in West Java. And so you sort of get accustomed to the different kinds of, language models and mental models of people, because language ultimately also mold one's mental modeling and how they see the world and how they express themselves, and how they imagine the world to be, and so on. The same thing, like I'm living in Yogyakarta right now, and all of my neighbors speak Javanese. And as you know, Javanese has, three tiers. And so if you're learning Javanese, you're really learning three different systems of languages, yeah, from the most refined and to the unrefined forms of Javanese. The same thing with Sundanese. It's a three-tier language. And so that's where the complexity lies, I think, right? Because languages also reflect the culture, reflects the society, and so on and so forth. So, we Indonesians are quite familiar with that kind of terrain, quite familiar with that kind of diversity and pluralism. And so I think there is that sense of pluralism in our DNA. And to be different is something that is a norm in Indonesia.
Must have been quite daunting for you when you came back from Sydney, to be not just to have to learn Bahasa Indonesia, but even within Indonesia itself, you've got these other languages. It's just on that one island, let alone elsewhere within the country.
Right.
And there's something like, correct me if I'm wrong, something like 17,000 islands within Indonesia.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, not all of them are inhabited, but it's still
only about 3,000 inhabitants.
Only 3,000.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I
we
mean, we're
are
an
the
island
largest.
nation here in the UK, but I mean, we don't have that.
Right. And I mean, we are, after all, the largest archipelagic nation as well. And we did sort of introduce the idea that that the oceans and seas are the uniting force of certain countries, especially archipelagic countries. And so we were one of the countries that promoted the laws of the seas, you see, and this idea about the ZEE and so on and so forth, yeah, the economic exclusive zones, for instance, yeah, because without that, then we would be considered like maybe 10 countries or 20 countries, right? I mean, given the three distinct time zones, for instance, and the geographies, the fragmented geographies, and the islands and the seas and oceans that separate us. And so it is a unique country in itself. And again, but we see Indonesia as being an integrated nation based on the sort of concept of the unitary country, the unitary state of Indonesia.
I think that's something that people sometimes, when they look at the world and they see all this ocean and stuff, some people today, they look at it like it's all separated and divided, but people don't realize that back in the past, especially in the past, the oceans were the highways of the world. And I think, especially with the current crisis that's been going on in the Middle East, people have realized just how much these are still the highways of the world today, in spite of air travel, in spite of road and rail networks. But so much of trade actually goes by the oceans. Without that, then we'd all be cut off.
Right. And, geographies also determine the kind of mental modelings that we become, right? I mean, continental people have different orientations in terms of their geography, in terms of how they
True.
look at the world, as opposed to those who are living on islands, right? So if you
and we're both from island nations, so we've always, those of us who know our history, we know that was how we got around the world.
Right, exactly. And so, island is a very sort of specific kind of people because they know the true north, for instance, right? So like in the case of Yogyakarta, for instance, or Bali, if you were to stay in Bali, for instance, there is no right or left or straight. There is only north, east, south, and west, right? And so if you ask for directions, without knowing the true north, you would not be able to decode, the direction that people tell you, because they're going to say, okay, go north, and then take the eastern road, and
Oh.
then you turn to the south. And it's like, that's not helpful. If you're a visitor to the island and don't know where the true north is. But usually in the case of Bali and Yogyakarta, for instance, we
So it's
use
probably
the
a good idea that I carry a compass in my pocket.
well, now we have smartphones, right? But
Yeah.
imagine 100 years ago or 300 years ago, right, where people
Mm.
rely on geographies. They rely on mountains, for instance,
Yeah.
right? In the case of in Yogyakarta, for instance, we use the Mount Merapi as our true north, because that's where, everybody can see. You see, so if one were to be in the city of Jogja, for instance, or on the campus of Universitas Gadjah Mada, you would be able to see Mount Merapi, right? And you would know that that's the true north. And so, you quickly adapt to that kind of thinking and know where is the west, where is the east, and where is the south. And that's how languages are also, the language of direction, for instance, is determined.
Mm. And of course, Yogyakarta is one of the traditional cultural centers of Indonesia as well, isn't it? What role does culture play in preserving harmony and unity between the different religious communities within Indonesia?
Well, I've been living in Yogyakarta for 15 years now,
Mm.
and I'm loving it. I can never get enough of Yogyakarta. And I think one of the draws to Yogyakarta is that as much as there is development, as much as there is modernization, but we are still stuck in time in terms of the history and culture of the place. We still have a sultan, we still have palaces, and we still have the court dancing, and we still have
Ramayana,
yeah,
which it
traveling.
confuses Muslims from elsewhere, doesn't it? But
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. So you feel like you're stuck in time, and you're
mm,
stuck with the culture and with the hierarchical, language, as I had earlier informed, about the refined and the unrefined languages of Java, of Javanese, for instance. But then, to some people, that is a major draw, because um, there's a lot of noise in this current contemporary world, right? And there's a lot of
yeah.
distraction. And so you sort of lose your sense of the tempo of life, right? And so you lose the sense and purpose in life oftentimes, because you get sort of thrown away or washed away by the fast-paced development and modernization to the extent that you no longer recognize your surrounding. You no longer recognize your own history and your own culture. And I think I feel sorry for, when I go to some places, I feel like, this could be anywhere, right? And so
Yeah.
you lose that sort of the the specialty or the uniqueness of the place, and you totally lose that sense of place.
That's something which I've noticed as well. Many places that I've been, I mean, even within Indonesia, if you go to Jakarta, Jakarta could be anywhere. I mean, and a few of the other large cities are like that. But then, as soon as like you get into like West Java, or around the surroundings of Jogja, or places like this, then you see the real Indonesia.
Mhm.
And even in the UK, I mean, if you go to our major cities like Birmingham or London, I mean, London's special in the sense it's like it's got certain things which give it a certain identity. But Birmingham and some of the other cities, they could be almost anywhere.
Right,
Um, but then it's like once you get out into the Cotswolds, you see like traditional English buildings and geography and churches and things.
right.
And it's true. I mean, a lot of places are losing that now. I mean, what do you think sometimes like modern society in like the name of progress that we drive forward without being, I don't know, thoughtful enough and without conserving the things which really should be treasures for us to preserve?
I mean, this is one of the sort of unintended consequences of globalization, if you like,
Mm,
right? I mean, this uniformization. If you remember some decades ago, there was a book on megatrends, right, which
mm.
looked at the ideas of fun, food, and fashion, where everything is coming together. So we've got international fast food retail, where everyone's eating hamburgers and pizzas everywhere you go, right, and drinking.
Globalization, yeah.
Right, yeah. So the idea that progress means uniformization and uniformization therefore means modernization, right? So if you're not part of the uniformization, then you're considered traditional, right? And it is these kinds of social categories, I think, are quite misleading at times, right? Because it doesn't serve any purpose in terms of how we look at reality or understand existence and understand cultures, that cultures ultimately are important, and cultures matter. Even somebody like Samuel P. Huntington, for instance, wrote a book on culture matters, right?
Yeah.
And so there is that sort of idea about the functions of cultures as well, which is oftentimes distinct from one another. But because of that, it serves a purpose in terms of the idea of who we are and who they are, identity, and so on. Not so much to sort of separate us in our sort of brotherly and sisterly love, for humanity and so on. But it's really to understand our own self, our own awareness about our history, about our culture,
Yeah.
about who we are, and where we came from.
This is true. I mean, it's one of the things, I mean, I've been to China a few times, and one of the things that I felt a bit sad for there was a lot of their cities just they're just modern cities. Yeah, obviously the food's Chinese and certain things like that, but it's like on first impressions, you could be anywhere. It's like it's not like very clear, and they've lost a lot of their like traditional sorry culture and architecture and things. Um, and it's one of the things which I've never been to Japan, but from what I've learned about Japan from afar, that I think the Japanese seem to have been good at modernizing while preserving their culture, and to such an extent that they've actually exported it around the world through their, manga and anime comics and stuff, which are modern, yes, but they're also, clearly informed by their traditional ideas, the traditional cultures, traditional stories, some of
Mhm.
which also stem from originally from China. You can see some of them like things like Dragon Ball Z, for instance, which are
Mhm.
based upon the what's it called, the Journey to the West,
Mhm.
about the Monkey King, and
Right.
then they adapted it into their own sort of version. But you can see where the ideas come from, and I think they've probably done better than many other countries in that respect.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've been to Japan like maybe 9, 10 times. I've been to China maybe 5, 6 times, and you're right. But there is a discrepancy between the cities and the urban centers and the rural areas, right? Because of modernization, we are also seeing this. Migration of people from the rural areas to the urban centers, right? So
Yeah.
there's that mass migration and urbanization, which is affecting a lot of things. One of the research that I did in Japan was in Middle Japan, where we sort of did research in the villages of Harihata and Mukugawa, in the upstreams of the Ado River near Biwako Lake, for instance. And you see that in rural areas, you only find old people there. In fact, in some
Yeah.
of the villages there, the youngest person in that village was probably like 65 or 69.
Mm.
And sometimes you find villages where there are only four people in the school, right? The principal, the teacher, and two students, or maybe one student with one cleaning service lady, for instance, right? And that's quite sad. And you're seeing some places like that in Indonesia as well. So urbanization
Mm.
is a major drive to the sort of social transformations that we are seeing in both the rural areas as well as in the urban centers. And hence you see this discrepancy in the development of the cities and the villages, right? So much more investment is going into the cities and urban areas, and therefore we are seeing these skyscrapers and this humongous malls and shopping centers, which have all become sort of cathedrals of consumerism, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're seeing that people are losing themselves in the villages, right? Because they've lost their sort of passion and drive to sort of cultivate the land and to plant paddies and rice and so on. When we did our research in Japan, for instance, in these villages, we had to help some of the villagers to plant the rice and to harvest the rice fields simply because there weren't sufficient labor to help the aged people to do the harvesting or the planting. And if you were to ask the students and the young people in the urban centers, they would not know how to plant rice, for instance, or they would not be able to recognize any of the vegetables being planted in their own villages, for instance, right? I mean, that's the extent of the sort of externalization of knowledge and the disappearance of, expertise among the traditional people in the villages.
This is something which I heard Japan was suffering from particularly badly, but it is something that you find across the world. I mean, I'm aware of it in my own country, and some of the European countries, like I heard in Italy, it's particularly bad as well,
Mhm.
for the same reason. And I think there are this problem is starting to be recognized, and there are initiatives to try to do something about it in some of these countries, but it's quite concerning, of course, because whether you live in the city or in the countryside, we all need food. And
Mhm.
if the food production process breaks down, then what are we going to eat? I mean, I, sometimes people don't really think about these things, do they?
Well, I mean that's the whole idea behind the GMOs, right? The
Mm.
genetically modified organisms, that would ultimately substitute our natural food, right?
But
So
even if
this
you
whole,
have GMOs, they're still got to be grown in the countryside. You can't grow them in tower. Well, you can grow some things in tower blocks,
I
I've
mean, that's
heard,
the whole
special
idea. I
ones.
mean,
But the most
yeah, I
things
mean
are
that's
not
the
grown in urban farms, are they?
right. No, I mean, some of these things are being, cultivated in labs, right? So in some countries, you now have meat that are, cultured in labs, and they're calling it meat, and they're trying to sort of mainstream this type of food to the population in the guise of food security, for instance, right? In the pretext of sort of filling in the gap due to the loss of labor in the rural areas. And of course, there are also other sort of social ramifications of urbanization because of the movement of people and the mobility of investments out of these traditional villages. And so what you find in the district of Gunung Kidul, for instance, which is part of the province of Yogyakarta, special region, we found that there was a high incidences of suicide because of the number of people who have urbanized, from and leaving their traditional homes and villages into the cities. And so you find depression, you find the loss in livelihoods, and therefore the loss in really purpose and meaning in life. And I feel like that's very sad. And that's I guess also one of the reasons why we are seeing high incidences of suicide in Japan as well, right? I think the number is somewhere like 37,000 cases and incidences per year. Now, obviously, most of the incidences of suicide are probably happening in the urban areas, but most likely some of the reasons for this to take place is because of the departure of these people from their traditional homes and villages.
No, I think this is something that a lot of people they don't consider. But I mean, we're seeing all around the world in so many countries that mental health crises. It's not just one country or another country. I know we have one here, and the services that we have to support people are overwhelmed with the number of cases that they can't meet demand, and there's not nearly enough investment in these services as what there should be. But of course, I mean, when communities become fragmented, then it creates stresses on people. And this is nothing with what you're doing as well, because you've highlighted some things here which a lot of people are studying separately. So people might be studying the situation of farming in Japan, or urbanization, or spiritual issues, or mental health. But one of the things I've noticed with your work is it tends to transcend all of these, and you see the connections between them. Yeah,
it's all connected, and this is why I think the problem with higher education. I mean, the idea of knowledge should be holistic, right? But our universities are structured in a way where they have schools and they have faculties, they have departments, they have study programs, they have concentrations, they have, very specific, highly specialized areas of expertise and so on. And of course, I mean, I understand the importance of specialization. But I think too much of specialization also sort of draws us into a blind spot, where we know so much about, something very little. And therefore, we are not able to see the larger picture. And so one of the things that I do to teach my students is to have that ability to zoom in and zoom out. So as scholars would say, you might want to focus on the tree, but never forget the forest, right? And if you're doing research on the forest, on the ecosystem, never forget the trees, right? So this ability to zoom out and zoom in, I think, is an important sort of skill set that any scholar, any researcher should have. And I think we are losing that type of competency and talent simply because we are too sort of preoccupied with this idea about specialization, as though specialization can resolve all of the problems and issues of the world. It can, right? So, right? I mean, we are dealing with
it's interesting you do that, because I teach my students the same thing in my own way, where I say, it's good to, okay, it's good, this is your subject, but you need to have some general knowledge as well, and try to have some general knowledge that's outside of your subject, because if you don't, then you just often will be missing the point, because you won't see the bigger picture. And I get this because a lot of people, they come to me as a chaplain and as someone in the community and ask me all sorts of things. And when I reply to them, I often drop things that they've not heard of before and they've been unaware of. And they'll ask me things and they'll be from different subjects. I'm like, how do you know that? And I said, well, I'm just interested. I'm actually interested in everything. So I'm fascinated by things. And if something takes my interest, I will watch a documentary on it. I'll read a book. I will start to learn about it. And it all sort of like goes into this like network of ideas that, you know, I'm learning about. So that, and I start to see the connections as well. So I mean, it's very interesting talking to you because you've been doing this for a long time as well.
Absolutely. And I can see the connections, you see. It's
Yeah.
just that I'm not always good at explaining things, you know, and to establish or have evidence to establish these connections. But I know that they are connected, right? For instance, the idea of suicide, for instance. Yeah. I mean, Albert Camus, the French philosopher, once said that, you know, suicide is one of the most complex um, issues of the world, you know, about existence.
Mm.
Why? Because it touches upon so many aspects of life and so many disciplines in our sciences, right? And there's not one discipline that can truly cover and explain well the phenomenon of suicide, right? Is it an individual psychological problem? Is it connected to social disintegration, harmony? Is it connected to mental health? Is it connected to loneliness? Is it connected to culture? Is it connected to belief? Is it connected to philosophy or certain ways of thinking, you know, about meaning and purpose in life? And, you know, is it about medical chemical imbalances? Is it what, you know? I mean, so there's so much to just one aspect of you know, reality that we see in society, and yet we don't have a sufficiently good answer to any of these riddles, you know, in society. So I think this is where my passion comes in, you see, and the curiosity that sort of is built in me to want to know, you know, at least some answers to these riddles. And I find it fascinating that the more we dig, you know, to these kinds of issues, the more we are, you know, finding ourselves in a rabbit hole, you know, this relentless chase and endless sort of pursuit of the truth. And so there is that sort of hopelessness, I guess, you know, in being able to understand everything. But at least one must try, you know, and try to seek the truth. Because I think as a scholar, we are all committed to the truth, right? And want to see the truth and understand the truth. But yet we know from the bottom of our heart that maybe ultimately we might not be truly satisfied with what we have and what we know about some of these realities.
I think you highlight something quite important there. And also, I mean, I can think myself so many different reasons that people commit suicide. Um, so that means it's connected to so many different things, so many
Right.
different factors. And I think there is a danger also, not just with suicide, but with all sorts of things that sort of touch on medical conditions.
Right.
There are many different factors. And it's like, whereas the way that things are set up at the moment, they like to try and simplify things. Oh, you've got this, so take this, take it 3 times a day, and that will solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that helps some people, but at the same time, everybody is so different. How can that apply to every different case? I mean, someone could have high blood pressure, for instance. Why do they have high blood pressure? For some people, there could be a genetic predisposition to have that. For
Mm-hmm.
some people, they might even be able to cope with a higher blood pressure than other people and be reasonably healthy. Whereas if
Mm-hmm.
someone else had blood pressure at that level, they would actually be suffering a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take account for that. I mean, you get that with body mass index as well. That
Right.
you know there are people that some people they have bigger bones. You try, you know, there will never be that kind of skinny person. They just it's impossible. And yet for someone else, if they were not built that way, and they had more weight, that would actually be a real problem for them. So I mean,
Absolutely.
there's so many different things like this that and you know, there could also be environmental factors in some of these things. You know, food. You know, things that are in our water supply. And unless it's identified, and once you just start unpicking, I don't think this is why people don't want to go down that road as well in many cases, because once you start, you know, it's like an onion. You know, you keep peeling back the layers, and there's just more and more and more, and you don't know where you are.
I mean, that's one of the fallacies of the thing about specialization, as I said.
Mm.
You know, oftentimes we fall into this, fallacy of the single factor, right? So
Mm.
we tend to think that X causes Y and assume that it is only X that causes Y, right? And so this is the problem I find when we go too much into this area of specialization, and whereby we lose the sort of wisdom to understand that there might be other factors that contribute. You know, you were saying about genetic predispositions, for instance. There are studies on suicide on DNAs and RNAs, for instance, right? Therefore, we can assume that there are some people who are more predisposed to suicide than others, right? That there are more people who are more inclined to commit suicide than other people, right? And so there is also that deterministic factor within us, you know, within our DNAs and RNAs that determine the level of inclination for us to commit or not commit to suicide, right? And some of these things are out of our hands. You know, some of these things we just leave God to decide, right? Or to leave nature to decide, right? And that's where I think that wisdom in knowing that we might not know everything or might not understand everything is a good thing. I mean, is a wise thing.
Well, that is actually the beginning of learning, and I think this is
Absolutely.
it's real refreshing to hear this because you're a professor as well, and sometimes you do speak to professors, and when you talk to them, it's like what they're saying, they think that is it, that's the answer, and especially when they're people of science, that is actually quite concerning because you know you have to have an open mind
Mhm.
to learn about these things. But
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons, Paul,
yeah,
why you
I
find
was
that.
going to say that the beginning of you know the to know that you don't know is the beginning of wisdom. I think
Right.
this goes back to Socrates, and this is
Yeah,
something that um, a lot of people they forget today.
absolutely. And it's interesting that you mentioned people in the science world, you know, or the science disciplines. And what's interesting in our research on radicalism, for instance,
Mm.
we found that a lot of radical people are people who are trained in the STEM field, in science, in engineering, in mathematics, or in physics, and so on. Less so than those who are trained in social sciences, humanities, literature, philosophy, religion, and so on, right? And so you do see an effect on how certain disciplines can also turn one into having a certain habits of the mind, right? Or habits of the heart, as Robert Bellah would say, right? Which ultimately determines your sort of perception of society, right? And whether one is inclined to embrace radical perspective and radical stance on things, or whether they would be much more tolerant in the way they see differences, in the way they see differing opinions, for instance, right? And we have proof on that. Yeah.
I know,
If you
it's something that I came across in my own work on counter extremism,
right.
and it is concerning. And I think we need to look at that and see that how that we can ensure that people have more of a whatever subject they study, that they can have this balance and open mind and realize that no one has all the answers. You know, it's like it is quite concerning when people turn out that way.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah, because sorry, it's a troubling thought, isn't it?
absolutely.
Mm. No, again, you touched on a variety of things there and how these things come together. Do you think that, like, maybe when we're studying some of these issues, that that's where a multidisciplinary approach, where you actually have people that are professionals or experts within different fields, that they are actually working together as a team to analyze an issue, that would actually help and help sort of transcend this issue?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, we are already sort of in the age of synthesis. You see, we're no longer in the age of analysis, right? Meaning to say that it is high time that we appreciate and celebrate, multi, inter, and transdisciplinary approaches to
Mm.
studies, to learning, to doing research and whatnot, right? Because not one discipline can resolve any of the complex issues that we are facing today. I mean, consider climate change,
Yeah.
right? Consider the energy scarcity. Consider corruption. I mean, these are some of the problems of humanity that we find today everywhere, right? But yet, we don't see that there is one scientific discipline or academic discipline that can truly satisfy us to provide a holistic understanding about the nature of these problems, right? The nature of these issues, right? Whether it be environmental issue, global warming, climate change, or the issue of, as we talked earlier, about suicide, about corruption, about energy scarcity, and so on and so forth, right? And this is where I think the synthesis needs to take place, where people of different disciplines and different academic backgrounds can sit down and try to sort of talk things through, right? Because I think many disciplines can help some of the problems that we are facing today, but there is not one academic scientific discipline that can, I would safely assume that could explain everything about climate change, everything about corruption, everything about suicide, for instance, right? I mean, there's just too many factors to be factored in. And this is where I think we need to collaborate, right? And the cooperation among scientists and academics and intellectuals, I think, um, you know, is an imperative call for us to do so.
It's true, and often, I mean, people can miss things as well. It's like the spiritual elements of these issues as well that are often missed, and humanitarian issues. It's like, okay, you want to save the environment, but what about the people who are living on the edge of that forest, who use that forest? You
Yeah.
can't just like cut off their resources and say, oh, you can never use that forest anymore. Otherwise, how are they going to survive? And
Yeah.
also, their traditional interaction with the forest in so many cases is actually beneficial to the forest. Is when someone else comes in and clear cuts it all and puts an oil palm plantation or something, or a spruce plantation in its place. But that's when you have a problem. Often the traditional uses were not causing any real issues.
Absolutely. That's exactly what we are finding out in Borneo, in Kalimantan, for instance, with deforestation and with the monoculture and the setting up of these plantations to replace the biodiversity that we are losing on an hourly and daily basis, right? And so one of the sort of perennial questions that both public officials and corporatist people are questioning, do we want to save the orang or the orangutans, right? So orang means people, right? So do we want to save and help develop the people or the people of the forest or the species, who are flourishing and living and dwelling in the forest, right? And so for many developmentalists, for instance, or corporatists, they would see that, they would shrug it off. They would shrug the question off and say, basically, we need to focus on the people who have the right to exploit the forest, for instance, but forgetting that biodiversity actually has a lot to do with the survivability of the human species as well, right? Because biodiversity provides so many things, not just living resources for the human species, but also it provides medicine and provides comfort, provides entertainment, and all of these ecosystem benefits, right, to the human species, which are often forgotten, right? Simply because they focus too much on the bottom line, on the profits, over the sanctity of the ecosystems that are keeping the multi-species alive, and those who are living in and around the area alive and thriving.
The other thing I noticed in a lot of these cases is there tends to be a very rigid polarization between those who want to preserve things, who think things just have to be a certain way, and those who want to have development and they just want to have that. And, it's like black and white. And really, I mean, in many of these cases, what's needed is a third way, something that actually allows a development of the forest, but also doesn't destroy it, and allows space for the nature, but also allows people to earn a living, and that we can get resources that we need for our civilization as well.
Right. But I think that goes back to our own sort of definition of development. What do we mean by development? And what do we mean by growth? Can we perennially and forever develop? Can we perennially and forever grow into something else, right? I mean, where is the tipping point? Is there a tipping point, right? I mean, we know, given the planet that we are living in, we know that everything is limited, right? That the living resources are limited.
It's not getting 10% larger every year.
Right, right. And even if you look at the data sets today on living resources, for instance, we know that by 2030, the human species would already be consuming almost like 2 times the resources of planet Earth, right? So this begs the question of, one, sustainability, but also the ethics of the use of living resources. Can we consume already the living resources that should have been inherited to the future generation, for instance, right? So this is where the interconnectivity comes in. This is where awareness needs to come in. And this is where I think wisdom and this idea about development needs to be re-evaluated. I mean, Amartya Sen for many years have been arguing that we should look at development as freedom, for instance, right? So this is another way of looking at development, not so much in terms of income, GDP, and livelihood, and so on, but development in terms of our ability to freely move and to outgrow ourselves and become better human beings, and to flourish and to be able to live our dreams, for instance. I mean, that's a different kind of development altogether, right? So we need to self-critique
And
us.
it's an interesting point you raised there because,
Mm.
in spite of people becoming more wealthy, we have autism spiraling, anxiety issues spiraling, mental health issues spiraling, suicide, as you said, spiraling. It's
Yeah,
like if people were really doing better and were healthier, then we would see declines. We wouldn't see these things getting worse.
absolutely. I mean, you look at the recent global studies on flourishing, right? Done by Harvard University, by Baylor University, Gallup poll, and you see that those who are on top of the list of the most flourishing nations are not the wealthy nations. The number one on top of the list is Indonesia. Number two is Mexico, and number three is the Philippines.
Mm.
Three of these countries are not like one would categorize as the richest nation on the planet, right? But yet they are considered to be the most flourishing. And so these researchers in Harvard and Baylor have,
And
have
people tend to be
used,
happy there, even if they're
pardon?
complaining. I've noticed this when I went to Indonesia, even if they're saying they haven't got everything they want, but they tend to be happier than a lot of people I meet here. You know,
Yeah, I mean, because there is that sense of satisfaction, which does not come out of possession of wealth or possession of materiality, right? So, what the researchers call the domains of human flourishing include not just satisfaction in life, the general satisfaction in life, but also this sense of meaning and purpose in life, for instance, right? I mean, that's an important aspect uh, to determine the level of flourishing that nations experience, right? Because without meaning and purpose, what is life, right? I mean, life becomes a brutish form of existence, right? Where everyone is fighting everyone else for the scarce resources, right? But that that is not going to lead societies to become flourishing, right? So it's this ability to comprehend the sort of bigger questions on life, about the purpose of life, the purpose of existence, and the meaning why, for instance, we are suffering and why we have conflicts and so on, right? And Aristotle from the early days have said that the idea of eudaimonia, for instance, is a chief good, right? And therefore the life of contemplation is happiness itself, right? And happiness is derived through contemplation, derived through the understanding about the meaning and purpose in life, for instance. And so these are some of the things in which our usual economists, for instance, miss out, right? Because they focus much more on income, on consumption, whether $1 a day or $2 a day, and GDPs and so on and so forth. But they don't look at the immaterial aspects of life. Yeah?
do you
And this
think
is,
do
yeah,
you think a
one of,
part of that has to do with historically, at least for the past just over 100 years, there were a lot of these people came from Europe or from North America or from certain already established countries in Asia like Japan and then Korea and China, rather than like from other countries in the world. Do you think that has a part to play in this perspective? And do you think like now you've got a lot more countries that are developing, like Indonesia and Philippines and Mexico and places like this, which and Brazil, of course, which are starting to come to more prominence in the world and play a more active role, and also countries in the Gulf as well. That this is actually going to increasingly change that paradigm and get people to think differently in the way they approach things.
absolutely. I think the world is changing. I think the political constellation is changing. The economic constellation is changing as well. And I think there's a greater sort of awareness about the negative effects of colonialism and imperialism, for instance, right? And how that has contributed negatively, for instance, to the development of the global South, for instance. I mean, consider this. I mean, prior to the British, colonialism, imperialism in India, for instance. I mean, India contributed maybe 35 to 37% of the world economy. But after the British imperialism, India only contributed 3% of its economy to the world economy. And so sovereignty matters, and the awareness about the potential that we have to develop ourselves, I think says a lot about this ability of these post-colonial nations, for instance, to rebuild their vision, to rebuild their societies, to become a much more prosperous nations. And I think with the rise of the BRICS nations, for instance, trying to sort of counter the sort of existing old powers that be, for instance, is testament to the fact that there are nations in the world right now that are already realizing the effects of economic imperialism and colonialism, and how it's limiting their growth, limiting their development, and somehow skewing their sort of trajectories for the future.
Definitely, I think you raised some very good points there. I hope they do, because I mean, obviously, it's not just any one country that's at stake. The whole world is at stake in the way
Absolutely.
things are going, and unless we find a more sustainable and balanced way forward, where we can be prosperous, we can have the freedom, as you said, and we can have a level of development that we need, but without destroying the very earth that we're living on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you could leave younger generations with one piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Again, I believe in learning, but not learning in the sense of formal education, right? But learning in terms of being fully aware of the realities that surround you and your life, your existence, right? To a certain extent, our educational system has left us with a different kind of ignorance, a different kind of unawareness. And so I think my sort of general attitude is to say that you need to develop skills to be able to think more holistically, right? And not just focus too much on your textbooks, for instance, or on the things that your teachers tell you and teach you, right? Because as we discussed earlier, I mean, as you grow older, you begin to realize that what you know is very little compared to what you should know, right? And so, but that needs to come from a critical mind, right? A critical mindset whereby you question everything, whereby you sort of challenge the underlying assumptions or the conventional wisdoms that societies hold, because oftentimes these conventional wisdoms are just simply wrong, right? And it just becomes theology, it just becomes belief, it just becomes a sociological truth. But if you investigate the true nature of the phenomenon, oftentimes you find out that this is completely wrong, that the underlying assumptions about these phenomena oftentimes is wrong, are wrong. And based on certain sort of biased or prejudiced visions of society or visions of humanity, right? So I think in all, we need to be very critical about what we learn in school, what we learn from the state, from the government, from other nations, and we need to have that strength and ability and liberty to be able to sort of free ourselves from the shackles of indoctrination and colonial mindset.
Thank you, Dicky Sofjan. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you for sharing the wisdom and insights that you have. I hope this is beneficial for our viewers, and I'm sure it will be. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Sure.
Take care, and
Thank
God
you.
bless.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.